The Mishnah tells us in Tainis, Misha Nichnas Av Mim'atim B'Simcha, when the month of Av begins, this coming Friday, Thursday night, one should minimize in their joy. It's in contrast to the famous statement we have regarding Purim. Misha Nichnas Adar Marbim B'Simcha. When we enter the month of Adar, the month where the Yontav of Purim happens, we increase our joy. In contrast, we decrease our joy. And one of the halachas, or I should say, or one of the minhagim we have during the 9 days, because of this, is not to have basar v'yayin, not to have meat or wine except for Shabbos and Dvar Mitzvah. And what is the reason for refraining from meat and wine during the 9 days? The reason is, some posts can bring down, it's based on this Mishnah. We know that Ein Simcha El Basar V'Yayin, one gets joy from eating meat and drinking wine, and therefore one should abstain from these pleasures during the 9 days. Or as the Aruch HaShulchan brings down, it's to remember that when we had the karbanos, the sacrifices of meat and wine, we used to bring on the karban. Since now we have the Churban Habayis, we have the destruction of the temple, so therefore we refrain from eating meat and wine. Whatever the minhag is, there's a minhag not to have meat and wine during this time period, except for its Dvar Mitzvah. So there's an interesting question in the Chidah, in the Birkei Yosef. The Birkei Yosef wants to know, what about leftovers? Let's say I'm not going to go ahead and barbecue some ribs and steak or meat, but let's say I did barbecue, or let's say on Shabbos I have to make food and have leftover food. Can I eat the leftover food on Sunday or during the 9 days? Of course, for some people it's not a 21st century shaila because they don't eat leftovers all year round. But assuming you eat leftovers, what about the question of, is there any room to be lenient regarding food that was made before the 9 days or during the 9 days but made beheter, made for Shabbos or for some other mitzvah? So Chidah says, he thinks we could bring a proof from a Gemara in Chulin. The Gemara in Chulin and Daf Yud Zayin talks about the Jewish people when they were in the Midbar, so they were able to eat basar nechira. Whatever the details are, is they didn't warrant the full shchita slaughtering process that we have today. It was enough just to do a similar or less intense type of shchita. As a discussion, maybe even you didn't have to do any, but you definitely didn't need the classic laws of shchita that we need today. In other words, if we did basar nechira today, it wouldn't be kosher because we have to do the laws of shchita. When the Jews entered Eretz Yisrael, the laws of shchita applied the way we know it today. So the Gemara, and we know it took 14 years for the Jews to do the kibush and chiluk, to conquer the land, 7 years, and then divide it another 7 years. So the Gemara has a discussion, what about the leftover meat that they had from the Midbar now that they entered the land of Israel? So any new animal they're going to slaughter, they have to slaughter with the appropriate laws of shchita, of slaughtering. However, what about the leftover meat they had? Do they have to throw it out? What is the status of that meat? So the Gemara goes through a whole discussion. Which years are we talking about? Are we talking about the first 7 years? Well, we don't have to worry about leftovers, because the Gemara talks about a concept of kadli de chazeri, that under certain situations they are permitted to eat treif, bacon, ham. So of course you can eat leftover meat, leftover kosher meat, kosher in the midbar, than eating treif. I would say no. that was only limited. They can only do it if they found the pot, the food in the house. They can't go ahead and just go into a store and buy non-kosher food. So the Gemara discusses whether we're talking about the first 7 years, the last 7 years. But the bottom line is, the Gemara leaves it a teiku. So, unresolved. So, people like saying, teiku stands for Tishbi, Eliyahu Tishbi, Yitaret Kushiyas V'Ribos. He comes to answer up the questions. The Brisker Rav didn't like that. He said that was made up by the elementary school teachers, the Cheder teachers, just to get the kids to think of the Mashiach. Really, it means take it from the word tik. You put it into a suitcase, you put it away, and then we get the answers later on whenever Eliyahu Hanavi comes. Why we have to wait for Eliyahu Hanavi and not Moshe Rabbeinu, that's a separate discussion. So either way, the Gemara leaves it a teiku. So Rashi is bothered, like, why is the Gemara even asking the question? It's not a libid de hilchos, so like, there's nothing, it's never going to happen again. We don't have bas and nechira anymore. So why is it relevant, and why is it a relevant question that we are discussing here? So Rashi writes, you're right, there doesn't seem to be any relevance, but it could be based on a different principle we have regarding. There's a discussion in the Gemara Sanhedrin about the concept of a ben sorer, a morer, a rebellious child. And I mean a rebellious child we have today, but there's a halachic definition. This person of the Gemara in the 8th parak in Sanhedrin goes into all the details. That we don't have today. In fact, maybe there never was. And Ira Nidachas, destroying a city that was a majority worshipped idols. So that's an opinion that we never had it. So why does the Torah tell us about it? Drush v'kibo schar. Just to learn Talmud Torah, that we can learn different principles, maybe machshava, hashkafa, but there is no halacha l'maisa. In fact, interesting. I think there's a machlokes Rav Baruch Be'er versus Rav Soloveitchik in terms of, is there any inyan of chakiras? In halacha, in the lamdish, you always go in to try to find the two sides, and then you give a nafkamina, practical difference. Is there any inyan of finding a chakira without a nafkamina? So some say, well, yeah, Talmud Torah, but I understand the sugya better. And others say no. I think Rav Soloveitchik, if there's no nafkamina, then you just stop philosophy bialma. So either way, there is this concept of drush v'kibo schar. And that's what Rashi says. There's nothing halach l'maisa, but was there to teach us for future. Just to learn different lessons. Comes along the Rosh and says, no, of course it's halach l'maisa. The Gemara is not going to bring it down if it's not relevant. When was the last time we had bas and nechira? No, bas and nechira isn't relevant, but the principle we learn out is relevant. Because the Rosh brings down, we have a rabbinic institution of chalav, of milk from a Gentile, milk products. Chalav akum. So, really we're talking about Gentile milk. We're talking about the ingredients are 100% kosher. But the issue is that, gvinas akum, it's done through a non-Jewish process. It's not the ingredients. So at one point, obviously, they instituted this zera of gvinas akum, not permitting to eat quote-unquote kosher cheese and ingredients, but not kosher. The rabbi said not to have it. So the question is, let's say you had leftover cheese. Let's say August 1st, they said that's it. Or Rosh Chodesh Av, they said no more gvinas akum. What about the 5 pounds of cheese you had in your house from before that? You permitted to eat the leftover cheese before the gvinas akum. So the Rosh writes, we see from this Gemara, because the Gemara over here in our Gemara Chulin is talking about meat, bas and nechira. We're talking about a daraisa, a biblical. So we have a principle: savek daraisa l'chumra, savek drabanan l'kula. We have a principle a doubt regarding a biblical law was strict, a doubt regarding a rabbinic law was lenient. However, so therefore, Bas and Nechira is a biblical law, but Gvinas Akam, that's only a Din D'Rabbanan. So a Din D'Rabbanan, we can apply the principle of Suffolk D'Rabbanan L'Kula and the Rosh. And that's what the Rosh says, that we can be lenient in the case of Gvinas Akam, you can eat the leftover cheese from before. So comes along the Berkei Yosef and says, if Gvinas Akam is mutter, that's a Gzeira D'Rabbanan, eating meat during the 9 days is only a minhag, so therefore we can be lenient regarding the minhag, and therefore he says he permits one to have leftover meat during the 9 days. However, it's a novel interpretation, it's a minority view. All the other poskim reject the Chidah. Why do they reject the Chidah? It's a nice Gemara in Chulin. However, they don't like the comparison. It is a nice Gemara in Chulin by Bas and Nechira, but they say there's a fundamental difference between the Gemara by Bas and Nechira or the Rosh's example of Gvinas Akum versus the case over here of the 9 days. So the question is, well, number one is we have a principle of bittul. We have a principle of nullification, or we go basarov, but that's only if you can't be mavarer. That's if you're not going to be able to work out the issues, then we go with rov. But if you could find out the situation, you have to find out. You need a bedika. So we have a principle, let's say, by adava sheyeshlo matirin, by the discussion Chametz on Pesach. So the question is, adava sheyeshlo matirin, we don't apply the laws of nullification. Because why rely on nullification? If you wait a little longer, it becomes permitted anyway. So therefore, as someone to point out, so when it comes to the case of the meat, the bas and the chira, that's never going to become permitted again. That's it. In the case of Gvinas Akam, unless the rabbis make a new decree, the way things stand now, it's never to become permitted. However, meat during the 9 days, everyone knows that after the 9 days the meat will be permitted, or during the 9 days on Shabbos. So therefore, they don't like the Chidah's comparison to eating meat during the 9 days, because that's something that's going to be permitted anyway, and therefore you can wait. And have the reason to look. Gets into also what in terms of Gvinas Akam, because it's something the rabbis told the people like months or weeks in advance, or they just woke up one morning and they said that's it. So different distinctions the post can make, but all agree that one is not permitted. They all disagree with the Chidah that one is not permitted to eat the basar. Well, definitely the Gemara says you can't eat the basar and the chira, and they all point out that they disagree, and one cannot eat leftovers. However, there are times, let's say someone has to eat meat in case of weakness. So, as the Mishnah Berurah brings down, if a person requires meat because of weakness or because of illness, it's permitted. And they also point out a pregnant woman, a nursing woman, if for whatever reason it's hard for them to eat dairy, so there's also room to be mako. However, even if you are going to be lenient with the meat, the Aruch HaShulchan brings down that it is better to have chicken than meat, because the Yikra Din HaGemara is the din of the red meat. Some make a distinction that maybe from the 7th day of Av, you should try to not have. Again, it all depends on how sick you are and what the issue is. So clearly, if you have to eat because of sickness or illness, then obviously you eat. But if you could have chicken instead of meat, chicken is better. And even better if you could at least if you eat If you eat leftover chicken or meat, you even have the chidah to rely on. So that's the minhag in terms of eating meat and wine, and therefore, this to summarize, so we pointed out the issue of eating meat and wine, and they point out that during the 9 days out simcha, or to remember the sacrifices that was discontinued, and that's the minhag except for bar mitzvah. And there was interesting chidah about eating leftovers, but our minhag is we don't follow the chidah. However, b'makam choli, and in need where a person has to have meat, so then they can have meat or chicken, and even then you might as well have the leftovers. At least you'll be following the chidah. We'll discuss a little bit about the mitzvah of Havdalah in general, but specifically regarding Havdalah during the 9 days in terms of drinking the wine or lack thereof, and as well as this year with Motzai Shabbos being Tisha B'Av, what do we do with Havdalah? So just to go back a step, we know there's a mitzvah of Havdalah all year round. When Shabbos is over, we mavdel ben Chodesh l'chol. Is this a mitzvah min Torah or a mitzvah midrabanan? So that is a machloket harishon, and the Rambam's opinion is we learn it out from the mitzvah of Kiddush, of Zachar, that this, the Torah tells us Zachar shama Shabbos l'kadsho, and the Rambam works out bechnisaso or v'yitziaso. This act is a mitzvah to talk about the uniqueness of Shabbos when it enters. So too we speak about the uniqueness of Shabbos when it leaves, i.e. Havdalah. So Havdalah and Kiddush are basically the bookends. So the Rambam Shita is that Kiddush and Havdalah, everyone agrees Kiddush is deraisa, but the Rambam says not only Kiddush is deraisa, but even Havdalah. Other Rishonim warn Havdalah is deraisa, but not based on Zachar, based on a pasuk in Parashat Shmini, lahavdil ben HaKodesh ben HaChol. And the other Rishonim say it's only derabanan. My nafkamina, what's the practical difference? But one practical difference is whether not so much the rice of derabanan, but whether it's going out from Kiddush, is whether women are chayiv in Havdalah. According to the Rambam, women are chayiv in Havdalah because everyone agrees noshim chayavis beKiddush hayom. The Gemara makes a drasha called Yeshnu b'Shmira, Yeshnu b'Zechi. Whoever is included in Shmira Shabbos is included in Kiddush as well, and therefore they point out that women are obligated in keeping Shabbos, are also obligated in keeping the mitzvah of Kiddush. So Kiddush, everyone agrees to. And that's the same drush that the Gemara makes regarding women by matzah. Even though it's a time-oriented Kiddush is a time-oriented mitzvah in matzah, but since it's included next to the negative, Baal Tochel Chametz, or Baal Tochel Chametz, or in the Yisur of Shomer Shabbos. So therefore they point out that there's a special drasha that even though women are exempt from time-oriented mitzvahs, they're still chayiv here. So that's the question regarding Havdalah all year round, whether it's the deraisa or derabanan. So regarding this coming week, the 9 days, there is an Isser we mentioned. There's an Isser Basav Ayayim, but in our case, there's a prohibition of drinking wine. So Kiddush, there's no discussion because it's a mitzvah, it's on Shabbos. But Havdalah is after Shabbos. So the question is, since Havdalah is after Shabbos, does it affect the Havdalah? So the Mechaber writes in Siman Tav Kufnin Aleph that the minig is to use wine and give it to a child to drink. And the Ramah writes, what type of child? V'dafka v'yagia l'chinach, only a child who reaches the age of chinuch, ve'enu yodeh was abba, but he doesn't know how to mourn over Jerusalem. And that's an Aruch HaShulchan, and then it's Mutalishos. So, but however, if there is no child present, so then we see you could drink the wine. So Meikar Adin, that from the Machaber and Ramah, it's mashma you could drink wine. Maybe L'chatchila if you could give it to someone else, but if not, Meikar Adin Havdalah is a mitzvah, and therefore, that's why you could eat meat for a Dvar Mitzvah, so too you could drink wine for a Dvar Mitzvah, and Havdalah is okay. Others have a minhag to use beer for Havdalah. The Aruch HaShulchan writes. So what's the Nekudas HaMachlokes? Whether you should use beer or whether you should use wine? Because how do we know you could use beer? So there's a concept by Havdalah of Chamar Medina, the drink of the town. So there's a whole discussion among the commentators. Is Chamar Medina only good when wine is not available, when you don't have a boy priyagafen? But no, even when you do have a boy priyagafen, you can do it. So if you hold, so one way, so if the only time Chamar Medina, if the only time you could use Chamar Medina when wine is not available, so you could tie in it, so that Shita holds that during the 9 days wine isn't available, and Havdalah I guess isn't enough of a tzarach, and therefore you should use beer. Or others saying no, that you always either that wine you shouldn't use Chamar Medina even if there's wine around, and therefore since Meikar Adin you can use wine, so therefore you use the wine. It comes down to there's different minhagim, but it comes down to where do you want to be meiko in Hilchas Havdalah or meiko in the 9 days. So to me it makes more sense to be meiko in the 9 days. Havdalah according to some is a daraisa, even though the drinking of the wine is only drabanan, but the mitzvah is meikara daraisa. So therefore to me it would make more sense to be machmir in Havdalah as opposed to the minhag of the 9 days. However, that's just that's the Zapilam. This the bottom line is whatever continue whatever minhag you have, continue doing this basis for both wine or beer. And regarding Havdalah at the end of Tisha B'Av or at the beginning of Tisha B'Av, because this year Tisha B'Av is on Shabbos, but on Tisha B'Av is on Shabbos we don't fast on Shabbos, we fast on Sunday. So when do we make Havdalah? So we only make Havdalah, so normally we make Havdalah Saturday night. So the question is, does it make a difference that when Havdalah falls out, when Tisha B'Av falls out on Sunday, will it make a difference for the Havdalah? So, and do we make Havdalah at all? So they point out that we don't make, the only time we make a Bar V'Samim is on the Saturday night, but we're not going to make the B'Samim. And basically we see it's a Machlokes Rishonim in terms of whether you make Havdalah at all. So, because the original Takana was that we just made Havdalah in the Shemona Esrei, as the Gemara in Brachas tells us, when we became wealthier, so they instituted Havdalah over wine. So as the Ramban writes, quoting from the Pasuk in Echan, on Tisha B'Av we're all poor, so we go back to the original din, there is no Havdalah, there is, of course there's a Havdalah, you can say Atachanatah, but there's no Havdalah ala kos. There's no Havdalah over wine. Others say, yeah, you do make Havdalah over wine, but you give it to a katan to drink. How come the Gemara tells us in Erevin that on Yom Kippur, when it's discussing making a shachiyano, we don't want to make a shachiyano of a cup of wine and give it to a katan because it's not good chinuch. That your child's going to grow up thinking that they could drink wine on Yom Kippur. So Tosfos points out there's a big distinction. Yom Kippur, number one, is darais and kares, Tisha B'Av isn't. And secondly, Yom Kippur happens every year. But when Tisha B'Av falling on Shabbos is only once in a while, so we don't have the same concern about chinuch. And in general, that's a question how far we go in terms of, do you ever, a machoket in the Rishonim, do you ever give a katan to drink when in a situation, when you're not supposed to be drinking? It gets into an issue of a Yom Tainus, but it's a separate discussion on Yom Tainus. What do you do? So either way, the first, there's an opinion of Rishon, no Havdalah at all. The other opinion is, you make Havdalah, we give it to a katan. And the opinion we follow is that we make Havdalah Sunday night. And we make Hamavdil ben Chodesh Uchol, and we make a Bor Pri Hagafen. That depends whether you're going to make, again, different minhagim. Do you make Havdalah over wine or beer? And also, even though it's already the 10th day, but the Ramah brings down a minhag that we don't even have Basar B'Yayin until the next morning, since it was a day of a tainus. So those are some of the issues that come up for Havdalah. Havdalah during the 9 days. So either you can make it over wine and give it to a katan. If not, you could drink it, or others say beer. Others suggest maybe grape juice is better. You don't have the same simcha. Then regarding the issue of Havdalah, when Tisha B'Av falls out on Saturday, i.e. Sunday, so different shittas in the Rishonim what to do. No Havdalah at all. Make Havdalah and give it to a katan. Or the way we follow is, we make Havdalah, we make the Bar Mira'esh, no B'Samim, on Saturday night. And then in Havdalah we make the next morning, or I should say the next night, we make Hamavdil ben Chodesh Uchol together with the Bar Pri Hagafen.